soon as we're live. Looks like we are. All right. Here we go. Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Connor Wolf about first failures in indie dev.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Welcome, everybody, to our live magical podcast. In this show, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster at the Indie Game Academy and the Purple Wizard. I was born in the very beginnings. I don't know. Anyway, as always, I'm your host. This is a live podcast that we host here in our Discord Wednesdays at 12 p.m. EST. So come and join us for the next one. Ask your own questions live. There's links to join down below. It is time for us to begin. Today, we are interviewing Connor Wolf, who is a QA analyst at Lost Boys Interactive. And today we're going to be talking about first failures in indie dev, which is an interesting subject, and we've all experienced before for the most part. All right, I am very excited to get started. Connor, what are you having for lunch here today?
Willem, I'm going for a tried and true sandwich and chips.
Beautiful, wonderful. Fun fact, I've actually been on a diet, so I'm going for water.
Really? Just water?
No, I'll probably eat something else, but I've been having a lot of water and not a lot of food. So if I'm grumpy, that's
fuel.
why.
You gotta fuel your body.
It's true. Well, welcome to the show, Connor. It's kind of been a long time coming. We've been talking about getting you on here for a while. So it's wonderful to finally have you here. As always, we got to start with that sweet origin story. So Connor, tell me about who you are, how you got to where you are today, and yeah, what you do.
Absolutely. So I always like to start when I am 8 years old. Some people dream about being astronauts. Some people dream about being firefighters. I have always wanted to be a game developer.
Freak yeah.
And I simply never outgrew the dream.
So childish.
And so, yeah, I think this is a passion industry, and that passion starts pretty young for me. So, I grew up in a cornfield, USA type town. I like to brag and say that our high school had the #1 Future Farmers of America chapter in the entire nation, to paint a little picture for you. So needless to say, my game dev journey was a lot of self-teaching for a while. It actually really didn't kick in until I got to go to university. I went to Bradley University in Illinois. Which is where I got to learn a little bit more about the industry, the hard skills of development, and more importantly, I think the soft skills of working with other devs. While I was at university, my roommate at the time suggested I apply to a program called the National Student Leadership Conference, which is a program that essentially trains high school students for possible career paths. And one of the career paths they had was game development. And they were looking for instructors and advisors for that program. And so fortunately, I applied, I got in, and from there, I got to start my wonderful, never-ending networking journey, meeting new people, learning new things about the industry, where to go, who to talk to, things like that. While I was there, I was recommended to apply to the GDC Conference Associate Program, and I applied, and I was able to get in March 2019. Now, funny thing about March 2019, some interesting things happened around that time. Meaning I was essentially working at a digital version of GDC, moderating rooms, roundtables, things like that. Around that time, I also got involved in some digital teaching some Unity courses for students who were looking to get into that. And from all of these connections, eventually I got in touch with some QA folks at Epic Games and was fortunate enough to get an entry-level testing position there. Fast forward 9 months later, and I went back to an in-person GDC. I was able to make some more connections and eventually land my current position, which is at Lost Boys as an analyst.
Awesome. Congratulations. It is, I can't imagine what around 2019 or 2020 hindered you in being at places in person. But it's wonderful to hear that story. And it sounds like a lot of the actual steps in the career were very much about networking, meeting the right people, and putting yourself out there and making yourself available. Would you say that that's correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always call myself an extroverted introvert, meaning around other people who are nerds, I can usually talk. But around people who can, just go out, walk up to someone and make friends, I'm a little bit more shy. And so I was pretty worried about the networking aspect of things until I got into the situations where I realized, oh, hey, you're just like me. You are also a nerd. And then from there, it's a lot easier.
Well, Connor, on the show, you're supposed to talk about yourself, not about me. But yeah, I feel you. It's one of the reasons I love games. And despite the fact that it's been so crazy, especially in these past 2-3 years, it's one of the reasons I'll never leave it, because the people here are all nerds and they all understand the pain, and they're just here for games. And it's so much easier. Like for those who haven't been to GDC, every time I go to GDC, it really feels like I've come home. And I leave so invigorated and just excited and just ready to make games and be a part of making games. So, get yourself over to some events like that, if not GDC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
There's digital events too. If you don't want to, fly to GDC.
Yeah.
I know, there's this Discord server called the Indie Game Academy. They do a playtest night,
indeed,
which I've started attending because it's always so fun to see people who are passionate about their work and getting feedback on it. So
absolutely, yeah, we do all kinds of other free events as well. So stop on by. There's links to join down below, and this is one of those free events right now. It's fantastic. I would love to hear.
Do I get the money for the plug after this?
We'll set you up. Cool. We'll talk about making a referral partner after this. You and I can.
That is a joke. I have to declare that was a joke.
Awesome. So I would love to talk about the topic. Let's get started with the topic. So what you pitched at us for the topic of today's episode was first failures in indie dev. Indies are very much on the rise right now, partly by necessity, because there's just not enough jobs for the amount of butts that want to be in seats. And so people are sort of discovering that the way that they make a games career realistic is they just don't care too much about finding a role. They might continue to do so, but they focus largely on their own portfolio building and potentially even their own revenue generation in one form or function in games. That's actually wonderful. I love that. I'm excited that we're in a time of indie growth, because even though it's a pain point, even though people are making less money, I'm losing health insurance like today or something. Not very excited about that. But it's still also, during these more trial periods of our life, this is when the industry tends to sort of reset and when new winners tend to come out. So I'm actually really excited that a bunch of fresh people are going to wind up starting wonderful studios, making money their own way, and delivering unto us brand new game concepts. Because let's face it, the AAA market's a little stale sometimes. So I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm really pumped about that happening, but what does it mean? What are the first failures in indie dev? Give us the 101.
Yeah, so failure is always one of these things that I feel like we talk about, and it's a little bit gilded the way we talk about it. Meaning, you'll get the surface level like, oh, it's so good to fail. It's so great, because when you fail, you can move on to the next thing. Folks, failing's not fun. Failing is not one of those things that you are going to look back on fondly and go, yes, failure.
Boy, it was so great. I loved that time that everything was terrible. That was the best.
Right. Yeah, but that is not to say that failure is a bad thing. Failure is something that is super important, because when we fail, we have a unique opportunity to learn from our failures. I'm sure if you're in the indie sphere, or honestly, if you're in any creative sphere, you've heard the phrase before, fail fast, fail hard, some variation of that. And that is good advice. However, I feel like that advice is often misinterpreted as just do as much as you can and screw it up as often as you can.
Yep.
And so with this topic, the reason I proposed it is because everyone fails, but not everyone realizes what that opportunity gives you. Not everyone realizes what is the point of the saying, fail fast and fail hard. And so today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about my first failure as an indie dev and break it down a little bit in terms of what the context is, what we did wrong, and what we learned from it. And hopefully by sharing some of these ideas, you can apply them to your projects as well.
I'm really excited for this. I kind of I think there's not enough opportunities to talk about failure. Actually, I don't know. It is both glorified, like you're talking about, which I think is a great point. But it's also, people don't want to hear about your failures unless you've got a success later, unless they're a part of a successful journey. Right. And so I think it's fantastic I think the glorification of failure is like maybe good. I think the part that's maybe negative about it is when people get stuck in the failure cycle, kind of, where they're like, oh, well, I'm supposed to fail a bunch. That's what all the internet gurus told me. But the problem is it really is kind of true. You know, it needs to be a stepping stone, and you need to pretty intentionally make it a stepping stone. It's really easy to just keep failing and let it continue to happen. So give us the intro then. Start us off. How did you fail?
Absolutely. Yes. So I want to talk about a very small portfolio piece that I was working on that quickly became out of scope and impossible for our team to make.
That's weird. I've never done that.
Yeah, I know. So I'm going to give a little bit of context here. During the period of time where I mentioned that I was going to all these digital events, I was still looking for a job. And so I said to myself, I want a nice portfolio piece. I want to work on something that I can put on my website and say, hey, I'm out of college now, but I can still do good work, you know, even during this weird, these times that are trying, as it is said. When I came up with this idea, I thought to myself, well, it would be nice to get a couple of my friends involved as well. Yeah, I just graduated, and so we were all looking for something to do. We came up with this very quick idea of a little card game, a digital card game a la, you know, your Hearthstones or your Slay the Spires, things like that. Basically a tech demo to show off, hey, you know, we can make these in-depth systems. We can make it look good. We can make it look polished. So that was how the project started. Foreshadowing is an interesting literary device. When things started opening back up again, we got to go back to GDC. Much like you mentioned before, GDC setting a fire in you, GDC set a fire in us. We wanted to do more with our small, tiny little portfolio piece. And so we started talking to our friends there. We found an artist who was looking for a little bit of work. We found someone who was interested in doing some production for us. And very quickly, our team of 3 or 4 designers and implementers became a team of 7 people. And then a couple months later, it was a team of 10 people. And then a couple months later, it was a team of 13 people. And we were working pretty diligently to get this thing done. And let me tell you, just 16 months later, our team of 4 people was in a little bit of trouble.
Wait, like the other 9 dropped off?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Life is funny. And when your team is composed primarily of people who are looking for jobs and are talented, the crazy thing is those people find jobs because they're talented.
Wild.
And unfortunately for us, all of our having a lot of people, manpower, was during the pre-production phase. The phase where we were scoping things out and we were trying to set our goals of what we could do as a team of 13.
And there's less production work to actually do as well.
Correct. And so, unfortunately, I had to have a pretty tough talk with my team. And this was in last October, actually. Had a talk with my team. I said, hey, guys, you know, we have this project. We've been working on it for a really long time. I am thinking to myself, we've been working on this for 16 months at this point. It's going to take us another 16 months to get something shippable. And so we talked about it and we said like, hey, why don't we take a couple months and figure out what we're going to do next? And that is the anticlimactic finale to my first failure as an indie dev.
So did you just stop production? You're just like,
yeah,
guess that's it.
We said we need to pull the plug. We need to figure out how we can fix this. And so, you know, we took our break. We took our time to sort of figure things out. And now we are working together again. We are trying to figure out how can we scope something that is more manageable? How can we scope something that everyone's going to stay passionate about?
Yep.
And yeah, I have 4 points here to go through about this. But first, I wanted to say if you had any questions, if I wasn't clear on anything.
Yeah, I mean,
pass it over to you.
It's a wonderful story, and it is fortunately, a pretty standard story. It happens to a lot of people. Rick in the comments says teaming with flaky characters is a rite of passage for game devs. I think in this case, the implication was that they aren't necessarily flaky, but you know, they have life and things like landing jobs. Yeah. But still, one way or another, anybody who's ever done a game jam has probably had 1 or 2 team members disappear or the whole team dissipated. And anybody who's ever worked on any kind of volunteer project understands the struggle of trying to keep people motivated when there is no legal implication whatsoever to keep you there. Or financial gain, you know, there's no incentive to keep somebody on a project. It's really hard. That said, I do think there's something for what Rick just mentioned, and I'm curious if one of your points will be something along these lines, where that process is kind of a rite of passage. Working on a project that falls apart is kind of a rite of passage. I've, you know, the IGA, which is really my first startup that's actually like working, is my 4th startup. There have been so many failures that I've gotten to here. So I think it's a good, don't aim for failure, but I think it's okay to fail. And it's one of the reasons that starting should just happen. There's no reason to wait, just go. And if it all falls apart, it's okay. All right. That's all I'll say. Tell me your points, Connor.
Absolutely. No, well, I wanted to just to sort of piggyback off of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been trying to keep in mind lately is this phrase, the time will pass anyway. Whether you start now or you start in 2 years, the time's going to pass. So if you're successful, if you fail, regardless of what happens, life keeps going. And so why not start now? And if you fail, you're going to be in the same spot as you were if you didn't do anything. You're going to be in the spot if you start now as if you push things off. So
either you will, if you don't do it, time will have passed and you'll have nothing to show for it. If you do it and it fails, you won't have a released game to show for it, but you'll have experience and pictures and a much better thought process on how to do it better next time.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's the adage, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The second best time is right now.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to jump right into my points here. So
awesome.
I wanted to reiterate right here, right at the start, the context for this point. This group of people is a group of close friends. This is a passion project that is a portfolio piece. And we are all just working together on this for really the first time we've ever been in this team together. So the failure that I want to talk about, the big thing that I think is one of the biggest things that we did not do was timelines, deadlines, time constraints. So life is life. We don't know what's coming around the corner. What we do know, if you have members on a team and they're looking for a job, you know that people are going to be people regardless. And if you say, do work whenever you get a chance to, they're going to do that. They're going to do work whenever they get a chance to. Now, here's the funny thing about when you get a chance to. is that is never a priority.
Yep.
If you frame the project as this is a passion project and there's no accountability, there's no constraint on how long you're going to be doing, people aren't going to work on it. And that's not their fault. It's just sort of a soft expectation. You know, if it's a matter of, hey, do you need to cook dinner tonight? Or do you need to do a little work on your passion project? People are gonna cook dinner. That's just how it goes. And the part of this that is sort of a learning experience is learning how your team works together. Learning to set these soft moments of celebration where you can say, hey, gang, look at what we did. That's essential for keeping motivation, for keeping momentum, for keeping everyone aligned on what the project's goal is. So for us, what we found pretty quickly was that one thing that helped us was dividing things up into sprints. So there's a whole other indie game lunch hour topic to be said about how you should structure the production of your project. But something that worked for us was saying, okay, art, narrative, and audio, you're going to be presenting a small little Google Slides PowerPoint of what you did on the next meeting. And then the meeting after that, implementation, design, and UX. You guys are going to be showing off the next week. And we had this sort of rotating schedule where it was like, we're going to get together in a call, our team meeting. It's going to take an extra 15, 20 minutes. And we're going to literally show off what we did. Now, there's a couple things that work really well about that. You get immediate feedback. You can sort of align everyone on the vision of the project, the sort of things that are unspoken. And that for us was something that immediately affected our work ethic. Even if it was like, we're going to have one slide to show off every week of, hey, I fixed this little bug. It was still one of those things that people were able to get together and have a great time showing off what they did. And it was also pretty motivating for like our implementers. So I don't know how many programmers are in the audience, but going back and looking at your code is not as cool as looking at a full page of concept art from your artists. And so being able to go to these events and be like, oh my God, I can't believe this is what we're making. This is sick. You know, that was something that immediately boosted everyone's morale. The team was super jazzed about that kind of stuff.
That's so funny. It's so this is very similar to what we used to do at Lumosity, which is my first industry job. We had, I think it was every single Friday, which is actually a pretty surprising amount of hourly commitment for most companies. But every single Friday we would have like an hour or so. That was the final hour of the day where we would do exactly that. We'd showcase what everyone's working on. And I think it's hysterical that you point out the differences in how work presents, how well it presents to the audience effectively, you know, your other team members. You know, somebody makes a cool piece of art, everyone's like, whoa, and somebody writes a cool piece of code, everyone's like, yeah, nice.
Sick.
Yeah. And that's something worth considering. I do love that though, as a structure. It's something that actually we started doing at the Indie Game Academy and we kind of dropped off because it felt like it kind of just added more hours. We're a part-time team as well, so you know, trying to fit in all the hours is hard. But you're making me want to do it again. It's a lot of fun to just check in and be like, hey, what'd you do? Let's celebrate it for a second. Celebration culture is huge, in my opinion. It does so much for your team and for its culture.
Yeah. Absolutely. Especially on, you know, projects that stretch on for months and months and months at a time.
Yes.
You need to have those little victories, because if you don't, it's like, gang, we've been working on this for a year and like, I don't even know what's going on. You know, I don't know what the thing is to celebrate. So.
Yep. So awesome. So the first point is timelines, deadlines, and time constraints. Did we already cover the second point? I'm sorry if I missed this.
No,
okay.
I'm
Nice.
transitioning into the second point.
Let's go.
I was just saying the showcases are what worked for us. That was kind of how we set our time constraints up.
Awesome. Love that.
So our second point here, we were designers who had not worked on this team before. We had this idea, and we had some other commercial products that we could look at as reference. And we scoped our game around what we saw. The failure here is that we are not those developers. And so the point here, the thing that we should have done is to scope in terms of time. Now, this is kind of a hard one, especially if this really is your first project. Scoping and budgeting your time is one of those skills that, like, unfortunately, you kind of just have to do stuff in order to figure out how long it's going to take you. But to give a sort of a concrete example, one that this is not related to the project. If you have a first-person shooter game and you say, we're going to make 6 maps, okay? Let's say you start drafting up that first map. The level designers take a crack at it. The environment artists take a crack at it. You send QA in there. You do some revisions on it. Let's say that whole process, that whole pipeline takes about 4 months. And you have already said, we're going to have 6 maps. We already have planned 6 maps. That's going to take 2 years for you to just do the maps, 24 months. And you need to ask yourself at that point, do I want to be working on this project for 2 years? For
2 years. Am I willing to commit to that? And honestly,
right,
2 years is like, your estimate. So it could be 3 years.
Exactly. They say, I think it's like you should always add 30% onto your time budgets, just like at the end, whatever number you get, slap 30 on.
One of my very first mentors used to tell me to actually multiply it by 3 to 4. Whatever you think this is going to take you. As your first learning, whatever you think it's going to take you, multiply it by 3 or 4 and you'll be more accurate. Yeah.
And that's one of those things. Like, if you start thinking about your project in terms of how long is this going to take me? I know that's kind of taboo. It's mixing the creative brain and the business brain of being like, you need to set these realistic scopes. And this is how you do it. So for us, and what I would recommend for the folks in the audience who are trying to do this, especially for their first time, is to prototype and stress test things. Prototyping is one of these things that I am really getting into lately. I have been taking the phrase code with a sledgehammer is kind of what I have been saying, meaning go into things with the intent of it being ugly to look at. There's a whole lot of talk about like best coding practices or how you should do things most efficiently. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to figure out how to do something, you need to put that part of your brain on hold and you just need to do something. Prototyping is a great way to do this. And stress testing is sort of the next step of this. It's how long would it take me to do this? And that's a key point that I think helps in that scoping in terms of time thing. If you're a first-time developer.
Amazing. So is that point number 2?
That's point number 2.
Nice.
Scope in terms of time.
Yeah.
You'll see there are some common threads among my recommendations of your first failures here.
I can tell you failed, sir. Yeah. I think part of what this alludes to, like sort of a larger lesson, I think, to pull out of this is just the pragmatism of approaching games. I think a lot of beginning developers, juniors, or people who have only worked on a game or 2 or have only like kind of done some practice projects, there's like an optimism that comes with game development that is simultaneously wonderful and leads to really beautiful projects and leads to really deep creativity, but is also, along with that wonderful part that is genuinely wonderful, it's super dangerous and sinks so many projects. It's really easy for you to assume the best. Example from my personal life, we ran a Kickstarter for an AR tabletop board game. To the public, you're supposed to put your pledge amount for a Kickstarter or crowdfunding pretty dang low, but internally you generally have a much higher estimate that you're actually hoping for. Our internal hope was that we were going to make $150,000. That's what I told my team. We're going to do this. We're going to make $150K. Did I have evidence to back that up? Not really, kind of. I'd done some research, but mostly it was me being really optimistic. And instead, what we made was exactly what all of the formulas estimated we would make, which is about $30,000. And our team survived and we shipped the game. And so, it's a great failure to learn from, or maybe success. But still, that optimism led to a really severe drop in the morale of our team. And to be honest, we sort of petered out how hard we were working on the project as a result of that, because everybody was expecting 150K. So instead of being excited about even being able to ship the board game at 30K, we were all just bummed out. And it took us so much longer to work on the damn thing than we thought it would. So
Right.
that optimism, I think, needs to be tempered by pragmatism. And that, I think, that by just being super straightforward, let's talk about it, the crappy stuff as well as the good stuff. And I think that's part of what you're alluding to with scope in terms of time. You should not be planning with optimism. You should be planning as pragmatically as you can. You should be designing with optimism. Hell yeah. But yeah, when you plan the thing out, expect it to take forever.
Yeah, and sort of a minor tangent. The way that you can do that really well is have one person be a director creatively and one person be a producer. I suppose pragmatically, like you said.
Yeah.
So you have the designer, the developer, or the director say like, "Oh, this is what we're gonna do. This is what we're gonna do," and then you have the producer step in and be like, "Buddy, that's gonna take us 6 years to do that. Let's try to come back." And having that sort of relationship, that sort of I guess friendly antagonism, constructive antagonism, can lead to a product that is closer to what the director wants, and also a product that you can make. So
that's sort of the eternal dance, the designer and the producer. The designer says, "We can do all this," and the producer says, "Probably not. Let's talk about it."
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So
number 3,
the third point.
Yeah.
The last point here that I have. I know I said 4 earlier, but I misread my notes here.
Okay.
This is the third point that I have.
I'm disappointed.
I'm sorry. This is the point that I think is the most important. This is the one that I would say that, like, if you're going to take anything away from this podcast, you're going to want to take away this point, and that is expectations. So, as I've mentioned a couple times, when we started working on our project, this was the idea that this was going to be a portfolio piece. It was going to be small. The more people we could get involved was so that it could be more polished and we could produce it faster. What we failed to do was properly convey those expectations to each other and stick to them. So, how can you learn from this? And this is something that I think everyone can do. When you start a project, when you start working on something, you should go into it with the question, why am I making this? Now, that question can have a lot of different answers. The answer to that question can literally be because I'm bored and I want to throw something in Engine. But you need to keep that in mind going forward. When you start the project with certain expectations, you need to stick with those expectations until the end of the project. So, for example, I've mentioned before, I do coding, I do programming. I've already mentioned code with a sledgehammer. If I am trying to roughly prototype a feature, I open a project and I think to myself, I'm going to work on this until I get the vibe of the feature, and then I'm never touching it again. I might delete it. I might take a video of it, take a screenshot of some of the code, and then delete it. Because the thought process that goes into that versus the thought process that goes into making a portfolio piece, very different. You're showing off 2 different skills. You're showing off 2 completely different skills. And you need to keep that in mind. If you're going into a project with the thought of, I want to publish a project, I want to make something shippable, you need to keep that in mind. Because that mindset, that's going to trickle down into everything you do. It's going to trickle down into the design. It's going to trickle down into the prototyping. It's going to trickle down into those time constraints that you're setting, because those expectations are what are driving you to complete whatever it is you're doing. So you need to find your purpose. You need to set those realistic goals, and then you need to work backwards. From there, you can say, how long is it going to take? what do we need for this? What do we need to show that we can do? What do we need to prototype to make sure it's within scope? And then from there, everything will start to work out. And I feel like the expectations are the thing that most people on their first project do not have correct.
Yeah, I think Rick made that point earlier that like working with flaky people is a rite of passage. I would expand that statement and say failing at a game project is a rite of passage. Failing at multiple game projects is a rite of passage. And the reason that I guess I make it a little bit bigger is because like a bunch of this stuff, like properly expectation handling with yourself and your team, is one of those things that you're gonna like think you did right. You're gonna listen to a podcast like this, and you'll be like, okay, sweet, I'm gonna do that. And then you're gonna try it, and then you're gonna realize, man, I really didn't do that very well. And I 100% agree that this is one of those things that is like hugely important. We did an experiment pretty recently at the Indie Game Academy where we made what we called a mega team for Ludum Dare. We put together a team of 48 people to build out a little narrative RPG. And it was awesome, but there was so much of it that got so messy so fast. And we spent over a month preparing to run a 3D game jam. And it still was so messy, and there were so many issues, and expectation setting was one of those things that we realized we did not do well enough. We had actual agreements that people just verbally agreed to. We didn't quite do contracts. But we did have written agreements that people were agreeing to. And those written agreements said things like, here's the hours that we expect. Here's what we're, hoping you do at these time periods. But one of the things that we totally didn't think of doing is that we wanted to release the thing on Steam, and that took a bunch of extra hours that nobody had actually agreed to. So that's the kind of thing we like thought we did it right, and we still messed up. So I think this is all a bit of a learning experience, and it's important for you to make the mistakes, hence the topic of the day, for you to learn a little bit more about it. And one way or another, I love this as a third point. Expectation management and expectation setting with yourself and your team is a really wonderful idea. And just jumping in and starting a game feels great, but there's so much that you can do to serve yourself and your team if you have a team, just by spending a second to say, what's the actual objective of this thing? What are we actually trying to do with it?
Absolutely. And it sort of ties back into what I was saying at the beginning about how failure is supposed to be something that is self-reflection. Mm-hmm. If you go back and you then look at what your expectations were and what happened on the project, that's how you can start identifying things that you're failing at. If you said we wanted 10 hours of content and you only got 2, well, then you need to look at your production pipeline. If you set these expectations, you're basically giving yourself your own success. You're setting your own goalposts. And from there, you can very easily figure out if what you did was helpful.
I love that. Yeah, it's its own learning tool as well. Even if the expectations are not met, then at least you have a goalpost to compare where you got to from, and learn a little bit more about, doing it better next time. All right, I want to make sure we've got some time for community questions. So I've pulled Rick up on stage. Rick, would you like to ask your first question? You're currently muted if you're talking.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so you mentioned learning the working style chemistry of your teams and how some people you'll work with better than others. What are your strategies for vetting if you have chemistry with specific developers, and how do you identify that you even do? And then once you've found somebody, when do you decide it's time to work on a longer term project with that person?
That's a really tough question. I think I have been fortunate enough that a lot of my experience from development has been with people that I already have chemistry with. I know there are folks that go on to sites like Fiverr or Upwork or join communities like this, and that's how they connect with people. My suggestion would be that you sit down, have some conversations about what you are passionate about in games. Actually, the team that I was working on has now been repurposed into a new team where we have a couple new team members. And for a while, we did a lot of exercises exploring like what makes us passionate about games. And so if one person, or if a couple people came and they were like, I really like deep narrative games with themes and stuff like that. And then somebody else comes in and is like, I love MMORPGs, which famously, maybe the narrative takes a little bit of a backseat from time to time. We would know that there's a little bit of a disconnect between those people. So one of the things that we did is we kept doing this sort of idea, this exercise of like, what makes you excited? What makes you passionate? And eventually we were able to find this sort of golden zone, this Venn diagram area where it was like, okay, everybody here likes aha moments, even if it's, you know, the narrative big reveal versus the detective being able to point and solve the mystery. So my suggestion would be, if you are working with somebody, find the things that you are both passionate about and decide what you want to do from there. Don't do it vice versa. Don't say, this is my idea, and now I need to find people that fit this idea. Work with each other and bounce off each other. And that's how you find success in small teams.
Yeah, that sounds very insightful. I know that what I like to do is jam with a lot of people and find like we purposely do low scope, low stakes games together. And then from those jam people, you know, you find there's a few people you really hit it off with and had a good working cycle. And those are the people you say, like, you know, you have follow-up conversations and say, hey, let's you want to do this cool idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's a great strategy.
I love that as a point too, because it's worth mentioning. So for instance, when at the Indie Game Academy, one of the things that we have people do is what's called filter listing of ideas before they commit to anything. And that is essentially just you setting objectives and comparing your game concepts against those objectives. But one of the objectives that we always include in there is personal excitement of the team. Because it's undeniable in an artistic field like this that on the other end of the production process, when that game is done, you can feel when the team was just having a fun time and was just pumped about making that game. So I love this idea of sort of balancing out, you know, just what is the team excited about? Let's figure out what the team's excited about and maximize for that. Rick, do you want to ask your second question? Keep you on stage for one more.
Yeah, sure. So you were talking about the rhythm of communication between the people who have these big ideas and the people who are actually implementing these big ideas. So what are the signs you have an effective push and pull rhythm between the ever optimistic design team who's like, we're going to add this, we're going to do this, and it's going to be huge. And then the ardently pragmatic implementation squad who's just going to say like, hey, we have only gotten halfway through your last idea, and your idea now is going to require like twice as much time than what we're currently working on. Like, let us finish something. Like what is the sign that you have a good, effective communication between the people who fit those roles?
That's a great question. So the first thing that I want to establish is that on small independent teams, small indie teams, you're not going to have well, I don't want to say in absolutes, but you're probably not going to have a designer who is just a designer. You're going to have a designer who is also an artist, or a designer who is also an implementer, which is what our experience was. So with that push and pull that you mentioned, the first thing that I would say, you absolutely need to have a level of trust. You need to have this expectation of, what I am going to propose to you is going to be something that you can do, and what you are going to deliver is something that is realistic. Signs that you have a good rhythm, that good chemistry, is when it takes fewer iterations to get to something that is realistic. When the designer proposes a feature and the producer or the implementer or whoever is reviewing it says, I don't think X, Y, or Z is realistic, sends it back to them. The designer says, okay, what if we tweaked it to be like this? That back and forth, that iteration cycle is what you're looking for, because that's how you get to that equilibrium where it's pulled as far as it can be pulled in both directions. The process of getting to that point, the process of finding that balance, it's tricky. And that is kind of just comes with the territory of working with this team for a while. You figure out the limits, the stress test, like I mentioned, of what the designers can do or what the implementers can do. And from there, you can kind of find a nice golden ground for everyone to be on.
Yeah, I think
that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, I think it's I think it's really this is a super tricky one. I've been asking a lot of people this question, and basically, how do you handle conflicting creative ideas? And I think there's no perfect answer, and I think a lot of it comes from failing and figuring out what works best for your team. And yeah, we could actually, that's another one we could talk about for an entire episode. But I want to get a couple more community questions in. So I've called EasyD up on the stage. EasyD is actually curious about quality assurance, and then we're going to get probably one more question in, and then we'll say goodbye.
Sure.
EasyD, would you like to ask your question?
So I was just wondering if that was a entry level role, because earlier when you mentioned it, when you mentioned QA analyst, I had come across some other industries that mentioned QA stuff, and as I'm still on my journey to get into the industry myself, I hear a lot of folks say, hey, you could do quality assurance analyst or a testing, and they say that QA testing is similar to game testing, and game testing is I hear is that game testing is another entry level role, and they say it's the best one to start with. So yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, if QA analyst was a entry role, and how does it play out?
So the fun thing about the game industry is that nobody knows what any titles mean, and there's no consistency across studios, countries, companies, anything like that. But I can speak a little generally to that. Generally, QA testers are your entry-level roles.
Mm-hmm.
Those are folks that are actually going to be playing games, writing bug reports, and verifying things and stuff like that. Analysts are a little bit step above that. Analysts basically identify areas that might need additional testing. They would be the folks that sort of write the test plans out, and then they pass it off to testers. In smaller companies, smaller studios, analysts might also do some testing themselves at Lost Boys. That's how it works. But as far as QA being a spot to get into the industry, I agree. I think that QA has the lowest barrier to entry, I would say. Now, that does not mean that QA is easy to enter. Nowhere is easy to enter right now, unfortunately.
Still the game industry.
Yeah, it's still competitive. Everyone's still vying to do it. But I mean, I got my start in QA. I know lots of folks who've gotten their starts in QA. And from QA, it's a nice place to get a little bit of exposure to everything. You get a little bit of the production timeline, you get a little bit of the design, you get a little bit of art, audio, whatever else is in your game that you're going to be bugging up. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, yeah. I was, it definitely clarifies a lot, and it gives me a genuine idea on where to go. It's just that like I say, I'm still just trying to find my way in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard.
Many people are. Yeah. The first thing I'm going to send you back is you need to make sure we can rack up the episode in time. But thank you for the question. And a final thought for you is it is definitely hard for everybody right now. One of the universal truths, two things. Number one, do the work that you would be doing on other people's projects. So basically, or your own projects if you put together a team. So basically, go be a QA analyst or a QA tester in this case. On some volunteer projects, volunteer to do that at a game jam, figure out how to get the experience, even though nobody will hire you. It's very possible. And it's one of the reasons that there's so much gatekeeping with entry-level roles, because it is very possible for you to contribute to volunteer projects and passion projects. And the second thing to say is just like the way that everybody gets jobs, especially right now during all the insanity, is networking. You meet the right people. So go out and meet the right people, go to events. You actually mentioned conventions earlier. GameConf Guide, GameConfGuide.com is a great place to start. There's a bunch of great ones out there. All right, I want to ask one more question. I'm going to say this for the audience member because we're definitely running out of time here, but I think it's a great place to stop. This is from Mohammed and is one that I've wondered myself. Mohammed asks, what can be considered as an indie success and not a failure, in your opinion?
You set the goals. I mean, what does it matter what I say? What matters is what you think. So it ties back to those expectations that I said.
Mm-hmm.
If you're starting the project, you're keeping in mind, why am I making this? If you hit those goals, it's a success.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's the long and short of it. If you go into the project with the idea of, I'm going to make a AAA level quality game and I'm going to publish it in a year and then I'm going to make millions of dollars on Steam, and you don't meet those expectations, yes, you failed. But whose fault is that? It's yours. You set the goalposts. You can move the goalposts if you want. I don't recommend moving the goalposts, but at the end of the day, whether you're a success or whether you're a failure, I mean, it's a little pretentious to say, but it's all in here. It's all in your head. You get to decide that.
Yeah.
If you're comparing yourselves to the crazy, the Balatros and the Undertales and the Lethal companies that make millions of dollars, if that's your goal, to make millions of dollars, you're going to have a hard time.
Those are less than 1% of indie games made.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
So if you make 1,000 games, that might happen once, probably not even.
Maybe, I don't know. If you're making 1,000 games, you're probably not making that level of quality. But like at the end of the day, you need to be able to find success for yourself.
Yeah.
And if I get success from me personally, I get success. I feel like it's a success if I can show it off to other people and they're interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
They go, whoa, that's cool. I hear that and I'm like, done. My work here is over. I've done what I need to do. If I get success from actually publishing it on itch, on Steam, on GOG or whatever, there you go. That's your success. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to have faith in yourself. You need to find the success for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't compare it to other people. Don't compare it to don't compare it to the things that you know, because for every one thing that you don't know, there's 1,000 things that you don't. And that's pretty much all I have to say on it.
I love that. It's honestly, it's a great place to end it. Yeah, success is what you define it as. That Kickstarter I mentioned as an example, I view it as a success. We didn't make $150,000, but you know what? A bunch of cool boxes of cool game we got to work on with cool art out in people's houses. And that's awesome.
You completed a Kickstarter.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Super cool.
Like that's
yeah. Proud of it. So I think part of that is actually what you said earlier, which is basically objective setting before the project starts. So what is success? Write that down, have it written down. If you've got financial goals, that's great. But approach them with as much pragmatism as you can. There's very straightforward research you can do to estimate how much money is realistic to make. Don't write down you're going to make millions of dollars, because it happens less than 1% of the time. Set yourself some realistic goals. Be super proud of $5,000. Be super proud of $500. Be super proud of $5. Whatever the heck the goal actually is. All right, Connor, before we say goodbye, there's two things we got to do. Number one, let's assign some homework to the audience. So what is something that the audience could do in the next week that'll take them about an hour to practice some of what you told us here today?
So we have talked a lot about expectations, and what I would challenge everyone here to do is to look at whatever you are working on or whatever you are about to start working on and write down those expectations. Meet with your team and try to get on the same page. If you're a solo developer, show it to somebody else and say, hey, does this seem realistic? Because answering those questions of what the goal of the project is going to change how you view the project. So that's your homework.
Nice. That's a really good one. All right. So everybody can do this. We want you to post this sucker to LinkedIn, tag the Indie Game Academy, tag Connor Wolf. If you're feeling uncomfortable to do it publicly, you can also share it in our Discord. Write down the expectations for your current project, or perhaps the next theoretical project you're going to work on if you don't have a current project. Share it with a team. Make sure they're realistic. If you don't have a team, if you're a solo dev, find somebody else who can review it. We'll help review it on LinkedIn. All right. And remember,
Absolutely.
of course, the 3 lessons of first failures in indie dev. Number 1 is to scope. Oh, I messed it up. Number 1 is timelines, deadlines, and time constraints. Number 2 is to scope in terms of time. And number 3 is expectation management. Connor, are there any last lessons or wisdom you want to impart, or anything you'd like to plug here at the end of the episode?
I don't have anything. Remember to take care of yourself, drink water, stay mentally healthy, and that's all I've got.
I love it. But one of my favorite quotes about drinking water: "You are not a cactus. Drink the water. Have water." All right, Connor, thank you
That's
for your
good.
time. Absolutely, this has been a fantastic episode. A really nice sort of return to like the structure of doing your practice projects and your solo devs. As always, we will be here again Wednesday next week at 12 p.m. There are links to join the Discord down below. Look up Connor Wolf. Anything that we mentioned in the episode will be in the links in the description down below. I think that's going to be it. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks so much.
Adios. Goodbye. Auf Wiedersehen. And goodbye to those watching the stream. We love you. This was super fun. Thank you, LinkedIn user. Thank you, Cat King. This has been fantastic. Adios.